Welcome to the Horror Story Channel, where nightmares come to life. Join us for spine-chilling tales of terror, creepy urban legends, and haunted places. If you're brave enough to face your deepest fears, hit the subscribe button and follow us on social media for our latest horror stories. Without any delay, let's jump right into the story. Whispers in the Fields, the mystery of the buried locket. Once upon a time, there was a happy family of 4 who lived a simple and pleasant life on a farm. The family consisted of a mother, a father, and their 2 children, a boy and a girl. They had a lovely farm that was home to lots of farm animals. The animals were a big part of their family and they treated them with love and care. Their farm was located in a peaceful countryside surrounded by lush green fields and towering mountains in the distance. The family's house was a charming wooden cottage that was painted in a warm shade of yellow. The house had a thatched roof, and it was adorned with beautiful floral window boxes that were filled with bright and colorful flowers. The father was a hard-working man who took care of the farm animals and the fields. He had a big heart and was always ready to lend a helping hand to anyone in need. The mother was a kind and nurturing woman who took care of the children and cooked delicious meals for the family. She was known for her warm smile and kind words. The boy was an energetic and adventurous child who loved to explore the farm and play with the animals. He was always up for a new challenge and enjoyed spending time outdoors. The girl was a gentle and caring child who loved to help her mother in the kitchen and take care of the animals. She had a soft spot for the baby animals and loved to cuddle with them. The family enjoyed spending time together and playing fun games. One of their favorite games was hide and seek, which they played in the vast fields around their farm. Another game they enjoyed playing was tag, where they would chase each other around the farm. They also loved to have picnics in the meadows and enjoy the beautiful scenery. The family's farm was home to a variety of animals, including cows, horses, chickens, goats, and pigs. The cows provided fresh milk every day, which the family used to make delicious cheese and butter. The horses helped with plowing the fields, and the chickens provided fresh eggs for breakfast. The goats and pigs were kept as pets and were loved by the children. The family's farm was a happy and peaceful place, and they cherished every moment they spent together. They lived a simple but fulfilling life, surrounded by the beauty of nature and the love of their family. The little boy was playing hide and go seek with his sister in the vast fields around their farm. He was determined to find the perfect hiding spot where his sister wouldn't be able to find him easily. He ran around the fields and behind the trees, but he couldn't seem to find a spot that felt safe enough to hide in. As he was walking through a particularly dense section of the fields, he spotted something shiny on the ground. It was a small necklace locket that was buried in the soil. He picked it up and examined it closely. It was old and rusty, and the chain was broken. He tried to open the locket, but it was stuck shut. He shook it a few times, and he heard a faint rattle inside. Suddenly, he felt a shiver run down his spine. He had a strange feeling that he wasn't alone in the fields. He turned around quickly but saw nothing but the waving grass. He tried to shake off the feeling and went back to examining the locket. He noticed that there was a small portrait inside the locket. It was a picture of a lady, but he couldn't quite make out her face. As he was trying to get a better look at the picture, he heard a faint whisper in his ear. It was a woman's voice, but he couldn't understand what she was saying. He felt his heart pounding in his chest, and he started to feel scared. He tried to run back to his sister, but his legs felt heavy, and he couldn't move. He closed his eyes tightly and took a deep breath, trying to calm down. When he opened his eyes again, the locket was gone, and he was alone in the fields. He looked around, but he couldn't see anyone. He felt relieved but also curious about what had just happened. He went back to his sister and told her about the locket, but he didn't mention the strange whisper he had heard. The little boy couldn't shake off the creepy feeling that he had experienced in the fields. He kept thinking about the locket and the mysterious woman in the picture. He knew that he had stumbled upon something strange and mysterious, and he couldn't wait to uncover the mystery behind the necklace locket. As the sun began to set, the mother started preparing dinner for the family. She was making a delicious roast chicken with mashed potatoes and gravy, and the aroma filled the house with a mouth-watering smell. The family gathered around the table, and they all enjoyed a beautiful dinner together. As the meal came to an end, the little boy couldn't contain his curiosity any longer. He told his mother about the mysterious locket that he had found in the fields. He told her how the woman in the picture had scared him and how he had heard a strange whisper in his ear. His mother listened patiently, and she could see the fear in her son's eyes. She held his hand and reassured him that everything was going to be okay. She told him that sometimes things seemed scary, but they weren't always as they seemed. After dinner, the family went to bed, and the mother tucked the children into bed. She kissed them goodnight and turned off the lights. As she was walking back to her room, she heard a scratching sound on the outside of the house. She froze in fear, trying to figure out what the sound was. She listened intently, and the scratching continued. She tried to tell herself that it was just the wind or an animal outside, but she couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong. She tiptoed to the window and peeked outside. The moon was shining brightly, and she could see something moving in the darkness. She couldn't make out what it was, but it seemed to be scratching at the window. She panicked and woke up her husband. They both went outside to investigate, but they couldn't find anything. They searched the perimeter of the house, but there was no sign of anyone or anything that could have caused the scratching sound. They went back inside, still feeling uneasy. The mother lay in bed, listening to the sound of her husband's breathing. She couldn't shake off the feeling that something was wrong, but she tried to tell herself that it was just her imagination. She closed her eyes and tried to go back to sleep, but the scratching sound continued. It was faint but persistent, like something was trying to claw its way into the house. The mother felt a sense of dread wash over her, and she knew that something was very wrong. She held onto her husband tightly, trying to find comfort in his presence. She didn't know what was happening, but she knew that she had to stay strong for her family. She closed her eyes and whispered a prayer, hoping that everything would be okay. Later on, the next afternoon, the kids eventually got back from school, and everyone started preparing for dinner. The mother cooked a delicious stew with vegetables, and the family gathered around the table to eat. The parents made small talk with their children, trying to keep the mood light and cheerful. As they finished their meal, the family noticed that the sun had set, and it was starting to get dark outside. The mother started cleaning up the dishes, while the father went to check on the animals in the barn. The mother was putting away the last of the dishes when she heard a strange sound coming from outside. She walked over to the window and looked outside, but she couldn't see anything. She shrugged it off and continued cleaning up the kitchen. Just as she finished, she heard a loud banging sound coming from the front door. She froze in fear, unsure of what to do. She cautiously approached the door and looked through the peephole. She couldn't see anything, but she could hear heavy breathing on the other side of the door. She called out to her husband, and he rushed back into the house. Together, they cautiously opened the door, but there was no one there. They searched the area around the house, but there was no sign of anyone or anything that could have caused the banging sound. The parents were both shaken by the events of the night, but they tried to reassure each other that everything was going to be okay. They hugged each other and decided to keep a close eye on things over the next few days. The mother woke up suddenly at 3 a.m. to the sound of the front door being repeatedly opened and shut, but there was no one there. She could see that the porch light was still on, but it was flickering erratically. She quickly got out of bed, flicked off the porch light, and made sure that the front door was properly locked with both the key lock and deadlock. As soon as she locked the door, she heard her children screaming uncontrollably and crying. Her adrenaline kicked in, and she frantically ran upstairs to check on them. She could hear her husband waking up as well, grabbing a bat from beside the bed as he made his way up the stairs. When she reached her children's bedroom, she found both of them in a state of complete panic. They were crying and screaming uncontrollably, unable to articulate what had happened. The mother tried to calm them down, but it was clear that something had terrified them. The father arrived at the bedroom soon after, and the family huddled together in fear. Suddenly, they heard a loud slam from downstairs, and they all froze in terror. The front door had been slammed shut with such force that it left several large cracks in the door itself. The family was traumatized by this event, unable to make sense of what had happened. They hugged each other tightly, trying to process the fear and confusion that they were feeling. The father made sure that everyone was safe and secure, locking all the doors and windows in the house. Despite their fear, the family decided to stay together and try to get some rest. They knew that they would need to confront the mystery of what had happened, but for now, they needed to recover from the shock and trauma of the night's events. The next morning, as the family was trying to make sense of the events from the previous night, the father stumbled upon something strange near the front door. It was the locket that the little boy had found while playing hide and seek, but it was now opened up with the lady's mid-shot portrait picture clearly visible. The locket was made of a dark metal material, and it was intricately designed with small etchings and carvings around the edges. The picture inside was old and faded, but still visible. The lady in the picture had a hauntingly beautiful face, with dark hair pulled back into a bun and piercing eyes that seemed to stare straight through the viewer. As the father looked closer at the picture, he suddenly felt a wave of intense emotion wash over him. It was as if he was in a trance-like state, unable to look away from the lady's face. He felt a sense of fear and dread creeping up inside of him, as if something was deeply wrong with the picture. He couldn't quite put his finger on what it was, but there was something off about the lady's face. It was almost as if she was staring back at him, communicating something that he couldn't quite understand. Despite the intense emotions that he was feeling, the father knew that he needed to share his discovery with the rest of the family. They all gathered around the locket, staring at the lady's portrait with a mix of curiosity and trepidation. As they looked closer, they noticed something strange about the lady's face. There was a subtle distortion around her eyes and mouth, almost as if her expression was shifting and changing right before their very eyes. The family couldn't quite explain what was happening, but they knew that they needed to get to the bottom of this mystery before it consumed them completely. They resolved to find out more about the locket and the lady in the picture, no matter what it took. Over the next few days, the family delved deep into researching the history of the locket and the lady in the picture. They scoured old records, visited historical archives, and spoke to experts in various fields. As they dug deeper, they uncovered a dark and disturbing history surrounding the lady in the picture. Her name was Elizabeth, and she had lived on the farm over a century ago with her husband and daughter. However, tragedy struck when Elizabeth's daughter went missing and was never found. The incident drove Elizabeth to the brink of madness, and she was eventually found dead by suicide in the nearby woods. The family now realized that the locket was more than just a simple trinket. It was a link to the past and a reminder of the dark secrets that were buried on their farm. As the days went by, they began to notice more and more strange occurrences happening around them. Doors would open and close by themselves, strange noises could be heard in the dead of night, and the family began to feel like they were being watched by an unseen presence. Despite their growing fear, the family refused to back down. They were determined to uncover the truth about the mysterious events that were unfolding around them. One night, as they were gathered around the kitchen table, they heard a sudden noise outside. It was the sound of rustling leaves and heavy footsteps, moving closer and closer to the house. The family froze in fear, unsure of what was about to happen. Suddenly, there was a loud banging at the front door, a sound so powerful that it shook the entire house. The family held their breath, waiting for the worst to happen. But when they cautiously opened the door, they found nothing but the empty darkness of the night. As they stood there, staring out into the abyss, the family realized that they were facing something much bigger and much darker than they had ever imagined. They knew that they had to keep pushing forward, no matter the cost. For the sake of their family and their farm, they would not back down. The family huddled together in the living room, paralyzed with fear. The room shook violently, as if an earthquake was happening right beneath them. The windows shattered, sending glass flying in all directions. Doors slammed shut, making it impossible for anyone to leave. Mysterious symbols and writing appeared on the walls, written in what looked like blood. Objects began to levitate off the ground, moving on their own accord. As the chaos continued, a deep, demonic voice echoed throughout the house. It screamed and growled, making the floors tremble beneath their feet. The family's screams were drowned out by the terrifying sound. Suddenly, the light fixtures began to fall from the ceiling, crashing to the ground with a loud bang. The radio flickered to life, but instead of music, it emitted a deep, ominous voice. It spoke with intent, promising unspeakable horrors if the family did not leave the house immediately. As they looked around in horror, they finally saw her. The lady from the Locket necklace was standing in front of them, surrounded by a halo of ominous darkness. Her eyes glowed with an otherworldly light, and her face was twisted into a grotesque smile. The family was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or speak. They were trapped in their own home, with a powerful and malevolent entity seeking to destroy them. As the dad held out the locket, the demonic entity seemed to pause and stare at it for a moment. The air was thick with tension and the family held their breath, unsure of what was going to happen. Suddenly, the little boy darted forward and snatched the locket from his father's hand. Without a word, he turned and ran out of the house, through the farmland and past the animals. His feet pounded against the earth as he ran, his heart racing with fear and adrenaline. He didn't stop until he reached a dark and misty lake, shrouded in a thick fog that seemed to swallow him up. The water was cold and black, reflecting the moonlight like a mirror. The boy stood at the edge of the lake, gasping for breath and clutching the locket tightly in his hand. He felt like he was being watched, like the eyes of the demonic entity were boring into him from the shadows. But he knew he couldn't let the locket stay in the house any longer. He had to get rid of it, to break the hold it had on his family. With a deep breath, he hurled the locket as far as he could into the dark waters of the lake. The locket hit the water with a splash, disappearing beneath the surface. For a moment, everything was still and silent. Then, the boy heard a low rumbling sound, like the earth itself was shaking. The mist over the lake began to swirl and twist, forming strange shapes and figures that seemed to dance in the moonlight. The boy didn't wait to see what would happen next. He turned and ran back to the house as fast as he could, his heart pounding in his chest. When he burst through the door, he found his family huddled together, safe and sound. After the terrifying experience at the house, the family decided to move out as soon as possible. They contacted a real estate agent and put the house up for sale. The agent was surprised at the family's urgency to sell and move out. However, the family was determined to leave the house behind and never look back. After the house was sold, the family did some research into the history of the property. They discovered that the land the house was built on had a dark history. It was rumored to have been a burial ground for indigenous people. The lady in the locket, whose name was Elizabeth, was a previous owner of the house in the early 1900s. She was known for her obsession with the land and the spirits that inhabited it. Elizabeth had been an amateur medium and had attempted to communicate with the spirits of the indigenous people buried on the land. She believed that they were trying to tell her something and that they had unfinished business. She spent most of her time in the house conducting seances and other spiritual rituals. Elizabeth's obsession with the land and the spirits became so intense that it drove her insane. She began to experience strange and terrifying paranormal activity in the house. She heard voices and saw apparitions, and the walls were covered in strange symbols and writing. Her obsession eventually led her to her death, and her spirit remained trapped in the house. The family realized that the locket they had found was a significant part of Elizabeth's obsession. It contained a picture of her mother, who had passed away when she was young. Elizabeth believed that her mother's spirit was trapped on the land and that she needed to communicate with her. The family also discovered that the previous owners of the house had experienced similar paranormal activity. They had attempted to conduct exorcisms and had brought in paranormal investigators to try and rid the house of the spirits. But nothing seemed to work, and the activity only grew worse. The family realized that they had been living in a house with a dark and tragic past. They were grateful to have made it out alive and were determined never to return. They hoped that the new owners would be able to rid the house of the spirits and find peace in their new home. As the family left the Elizabeth Manor, they all looked back at the old house one last time. It stood there, ominous and silent, almost as if it were watching them leave. They got into the car and drove away, grateful to be leaving the haunted house behind. But as they drove down the road, they couldn't help but wonder who would buy the Elizabeth Manor. Would they be haunted by the same ghostly presence that had terrorized their family? Or would the new owners be able to rid the house of its sinister past? The family couldn't shake the feeling that the house would remain empty for a long time. They knew that the Elizabeth Manor would be a hard sell, given its terrifying reputation. But they also knew that someone, someday, would take on the challenge of owning the house. As they drove away, the family made a vow to never return to the Elizabeth Manor. They didn't want to risk encountering the ghostly presence that had haunted their family for so long. But despite their best efforts, the family couldn't help but feel a sense of foreboding. They knew that the Elizabeth Manor would always be haunted, and that its dark secrets would continue to be a mystery for generations to come.